Hi guys, in this how to every step video I'm going to show you how to fully refurbish a corroded and curbed alloy wheel. I will show you the sanding, degreasing and masking process to prepare the wheel for painting, and then how to spray the wheel with primer, silver base coat and then clear lacquer in 12 easy to follow steps. So, step 1. Deep clean the wheel. It really is worth spending the time to deep clean the alloy wheels to remove all brake dust and dirt. I have done another video on extreme brake dust removal, so won't go into too much detail here. Ensure you clean the back of the wheel too, as this really needs prepping for a professional refurb. Following the deep clean, you can see the full extent of the areas that need sanding down. Step 2. 80 grit sanding. So in this step we are going to sand away all corrosion and flaking paint to the bare aluminium surface. To drastically speed up this process, I'm using a 75mm or 3-inch diameter Velcro sanding disc drill attachment. Simply attach an 80 grit 75mm Velcro sanding disc. Then you need to hold your drill firmly with both hands while sanding back all areas of corrosion and flaking paint. Holding the drill firmly is the key here, as otherwise the sanding disc can creep into areas where you don't need to sand. You want to sand back deep enough that you have a nice clean aluminium surface with no pitting. For the areas you cannot reach with the sanding disc drill attachment, use a couple of folded over sanding discs to hand sand those difficult to reach areas. For the kerb rash, use the disc sander to remove any high spots. Be very careful not to sand the tyre. Then use a folded sanding disc to hand sand until the edge is smooth. For the bolt hole recesses, use a drill brush attachment to remove all flaky paint and corrosion. Then hand sand the bolt hole edges till smooth. The back of these wheels are corroded too and need sanding back so the corrosion will not creep round to the front of the wheel and lift the paint after the refurb. This is a commonly missed step, but if you have corrosion on the front of the wheels, you are most likely to have it on the backs of the wheels too. Use a drill brush attachment to remove all flaky paint and corrosion, particularly concentrating on the spoke edges. At the end of this step, the wheel should have all corrosion, curbing and flaking paint all sanded back to the bare aluminium. This 80 grit sanding step is by far the most laborious step, but worth doing well to achieve the best final result. Step 3. Fill deep kerb rash scratches. Mix up a small amount of alloy wheel filler, then apply just enough to fill any kerb scratches. When dried, use 80 grit sandpaper to sand the filler flat. Step 4. 180 grit sanding. Fix a 180 grit sanding disc to the drill attachment. Drill sand everywhere you previously drilled with 80 grit. The purpose is to sand out all the deep scratches left by the 80 grit sanding. You should sand slightly further out than the 80 grit sanding in order to blend the sanding into the good unsanded paintwork. In close-up you can see the 80 grit scratches being removed by the 180 grit sanding. Then hand sand all the hard to reach areas. Step 5. 320 grit sanding. Use a folded 320 grit sanding disc to sand all the areas previously sanded by the 180 grit sanding. Again, you should sand slightly further out than the 180 grit sanding in order to blend the sanding into the good unsanded paintwork. Step 6. 400 grit sanding. Use a folded 400 grit sanding disc to sand all the areas previously sanded by the 320 grit sanding. Again, you should sand slightly further out than the 320 grit sanding in order to blend the sanding into the good unsanded paintwork. Give the wheel a good wipe down ready for the next step. Step 7. 600 grit wet and dry sanding. Ensure the 600 grit sandpaper is waterproof so it is suitable for wet sanding. Thoroughly wet the sandpaper and the wheel with water. A spray bottle is perfect for this. Then thoroughly wet sand the entire wheel. The purpose of this sanding is to key in the surface so that the paint will stick well to it. So sand where you have previously sanded as well as all the other unsanded paint. Thoroughly wipe away any residue left from the wet sanding. Once dried, all the paint should have a matte appearance. If you see any gloss paint finish, then repeat wet sanding with 600 grit wet and dry paper. The wheel is now fully sanded, ready for paint. Step 8. Clean and degrease. Use a clean microfiber cloth to thoroughly wipe down the front and back of the wheel. All sanding dust needs to be removed at this stage. A compressed air line works well for this too. To degrease the wheel, I use white spirit. You could also use an alcohol panel wipe, which is just as good. Apply white spirit to another clean microfiber cloth and wipe down the entire wheel. Ensure all the surface is wiped well, even around the tyre valve, bolt hole recesses and around the edge of the wheel where it meets the tyre. Step 9. Mask off the wheel. A deck of playing cards is perfect for masking the alloy wheel and is much quicker than using masking tape. Simply insert each playing card in between the inner edge of the alloy wheel and the tyre bead. Make sure you have a minimum overlap of half a playing card to prevent overspray getting through to the tyre. Tape some polythene bags around the tyre sidewall and tread to prevent any overspray on the tyre itself. Finally, use some masking tape to mask around the tyre valve. Step 10. Primer spray paint. Spray paint will transfer better at warmer temperatures. If spraying in cold conditions, warm the paint by sitting the can in a mix of 2/3 boiling and 1/3 cold water for 10 minutes. Also shake the can well for at least 2 minutes. I spray 4 coats of primer, the first being a light dust coat, the second being a medium coat, and the third and fourth being heavy coats. For the first primer coat, apply a very light dust coat. The aim here is to lightly cover the entire surface, and it does not matter if you can still see the alloy wheel colour through the primer. The dust coat will help the later coats adhere better. Leave for 15 minutes to dry. For the second coat, spray a medium primer coat. Start spraying the spoke sides and the wheel rim and then spray the front face of the wheel. Leave for a further 15 minutes to dry. For the third coat, spray a heavier primer coat. Use long and repeated spray passes to build up the heavier layer here. At this stage you should achieve a full primer coverage and not be able to see any of the alloy wheel colour through the primer. Leave for a further 15 minutes to dry. For the final fourth, heavier primer coat, again spray evenly with long and repeated spray passes to build up a heavier layer here. Here you can see that after the 4 primer layers you achieve a perfectly smooth surface with no imperfections or visible scratches. Leave to harden for 24 hours before applying the base coat. Step 11. Silver base coat spray paint. Again, if spraying in cold conditions, warm the silver base coat the same way as done for the primer. Like with the primer, I spray 4 coats of base coat. The first coat being the light dust coat, the second being a medium coat, and the third and fourth being heavy coats. For the first base coat, apply a very light dust coat. The aim here is to lightly cover the entire surface, and it does not matter if you can still see the primer colour through the base coat. The dust coat will help later coats adhere better. Leave for 15 minutes to dry. For the second coat, spray a medium base coat. Start spraying the spoke sides and the wheel rim, and then spray the front face of the wheel. Leave for a further 15 minutes to dry. For the third coat, spray a heavy base coat. Use long and repeated spray passes to build up the heavy layer here. At this stage you should achieve a full base coat coverage and not be able to see any of the primer colour through the base coat. Leave for a further 15 minutes to dry. For the final, fourth heavy base coat, again spray evenly with long and repeated spray passes to build up the heavy layer. Here you can see all your hard work starting to pay off. You should have a nice smooth, even coverage with no imperfections. Leave to harden for 24 hours before applying the clear lacquer coat. Step 12. Clear lacquer spray paint. Again, if spraying in cold conditions, warm the lacquer the same way as done for the primer and base coat. Like with the primer and base coats, I spray 4 coats of lacquer, the first being a light dust coat, the second being a medium coat, and the third and fourth being heavy coats. For the first lacquer coat, apply a very light dust coat to help the later coats adhere better. Leave for 15 minutes to dry. For the second coat, spray a medium coat of lacquer. Start spraying the spoke sides and the wheel rim, and then spray the front face of the wheel. Leave for a further 15 minutes to dry. For the third coat, spray a heavy coat of lacquer. Use long and repeated spray passes to build up the heavy layer here. At this stage you should see a fully wetted glossy layer on the surface of the wheel. Leave for a further 15 minutes to dry. For the final, fourth base coat, again spray evenly with long repeated spray passes to build up the heavy layer here. Leave for 30 minutes so the lacquer is touch dry but not hardened, and then remove the playing cards and masking. Then leave for 24 hours for the lacquer to fully harden. Here is the finished result. The wheel is gleaming and now in brand new condition. There we go guys, job done. So here is the every step summary. And here is a list of tools and materials required. We hope you found this video useful. If you did, please like, subscribe and leave comments below. Click above for more how-to every step videos.